Each victim appeared to have sustained gunshot wounds. Pursuit of justice is never easy, and it sometimes takes a long and circuitous route.
It's a very readable or identifiable print, and at some point, that print will be matched.
Today, after almost 46 years, I am announcing an arrest has been made in the homicides of
a single fingerprint. That's all it took to crack open a case that haunted Massachusetts for nearly half a century. But before that fingerprint would speak its truth, 2 young lives would be cut tragically short on a November night in 1978. Meet Teresa Mark. At 18, she filled notebooks with stories she dreamed of publishing someday. The kind of person who could light up a room with her laugh, who treated every animal in the pet department where she worked like it was her own. And Mark Harnish, a quiet 20-year-old whose hands could coax any engine back to life, who found his peace under the hood of his prized green Dodge truck. They left a friend's party that night, November 18, 1978. Just another Saturday evening in East Longmeadow. Young love, laughter in the air, and no reason to think anything was wrong. No way to know that in just a few hours, their story would become one that would haunt investigators for decades. What turns an ordinary evening into a nightmare? Who was the shadow waiting at that quiet rest stop on Route 5? And how could a single bloodied fingerprint, preserved by dedicated investigators for 46 years, finally break the silence and bring answers to a community that never stopped asking questions? In this video, we're piecing together more than just a cold case. We're telling the story of Teresa and Mark, of the lives they lived and the dreams they carried. We're walking through the painstaking work of investigators who refused to let this case gather dust. And we're uncovering how time, technology, and tenacity finally brought a suspect to justice after nearly half a century of silence. But before we dive deeper into the mystery, I'd like to ask for a small favor. The statistics show that more than 70% of you watching aren't subscribed to the channel yet. If you're enjoying these deep dives into true crime and want to stay updated on future cases, please consider subscribing. It really helps the channel grow and ensures you don't miss out on any new videos. Now, without further ado, let's get back to the case. Teresa Mark's story begins in 1960, in a corner of Massachusetts where everyone seemed to know everyone else. East Longmeadow wasn't just a dot on the map. It was the kind of place where families put down roots, where the Mark name carried the weight of community ties. As the youngest of 3, Teresa grew up surrounded by the kind of love that shapes a person's soul. Ask anyone who knew her, and they'll tell you about her laugh first. It wasn't just that she was funny, though she was, quick with a joke that could crack up an entire room. It was the way she approached life itself, with an energy that seemed to spill over into everything she touched. Her high school hallways still echoed with that energy long after she'd passed through them. But Teresa wasn't just about bringing smiles to faces. Behind that vibrant personality was a mind that never stopped creating. Those notebooks she carried, they weren't just for show. Every page held another story, another poem, another piece of herself she hoped to share with the world someday. Her teachers saw it, that spark that meant someone was going places. Her classmates felt it too, drawn to that mix of intelligence and genuine warmth that made Teresa who she was. After school, you'd find her at the local hardware store, managing the pet department. It wasn't just a job to her. It was where her natural instincts as a caretaker really shone. Teresa was a natural caretaker, her colleagues would say, watching her tend to every creature as if it were her own. That was Teresa, always giving pieces of her heart away. Then there was Mark Harnish. Born in 1958 in South Dennis before his family made their way to East Longmeadow. Mark was the kind of kid who needed to know how everything worked. While other children were playing with toys, he was taking them apart, figuring out what made them tick. His father, seeing that mechanical mind at work, recognized something of himself in his son. As an automobile mechanic himself, he nurtured that curiosity, watching it grow into a passion that would define Mark's life. At East Longmeadow High School, Mark carved out his own quiet space. He wasn't the type to command attention like Teresa did. He let his work speak for itself. Teachers noticed it. That steady, reliable presence. That unwavering focus when he set his mind to something. While others were looking for shortcuts, Mark was putting in the hours, earning a reputation you couldn't buy. Trustworthy, dependable, someone you could count on. After graduation, that reputation followed him to the local auto repair shop where he started his apprenticeship. His colleagues saw it right away, the way he could look at an engine and see not just what was wrong, but how to make it right. Customers started asking for him by name, trusting their vehicles to the quiet young man with the sure hands and careful eye. But to really understand Mark, you had to see him with his pride and joy. That green 1967 Dodge pickup truck. Every weekend, if he wasn't at the lake with a fishing rod in his hands, he was working on that truck. To most people, it was just an old Dodge. To Mark, it was freedom on four wheels, a project that was never quite finished because he was always finding ways to make it better. When two souls like Teresa and Mark find each other in a small town, people notice. They might have passed each other 100 times in those high school hallways. But it wasn't until after graduation that their story really began. Their friends loved telling the story of how it happened. Social gatherings where Teresa's laughter would catch Mark's attention, where his quiet strength drew her in. On paper, they shouldn't have worked. She was the spark that lit up every room. He was the steady flame that burned quietly in the corner. But anyone who saw them together understood. They weren't opposites attracting. They were pieces fitting perfectly together. Teresa's mother would later say that Mark was the kind of man every mother hopes their daughter will find. Someone who would protect her no matter what. Those words would haunt her family for decades to come. By November 1978, they'd been writing their story together for just under a year. Mark was already dreaming about opening his own repair shop someday, while Teresa was filling more notebooks with the stories she hoped to publish. They were young, in love, and building their future one day at a time. You'd often see them cruising around town in that green Dodge truck, Teresa's laughter mixing with the rumble of the engine Mark had tuned to perfection. November 18, 1978, started out like any other Saturday. The party at their friend's house in East Longmeadow was nothing special. Just the usual crowd, the usual music, the usual laughter. Witnesses would later remember how normal everything seemed. Teresa was being Teresa, lighting up the room with her presence. Mark was being Mark, keeping that watchful eye on her, making sure she was okay. Around midnight, Teresa mentioned to a friend that she and Mark were thinking about heading out. No big plans, just two young people looking to spend some time together. At 12:30 a.m., they said their goodbyes and walked out to Mark's truck. Nobody knew they were watching their friends leave for the last time. The hours between 12:30 a.m. and dawn would change everything. At 4 a.m., someone living near Route 5 in West Springfield heard gunshots pierce the night. They called it in, just another noise complaint in the early morning hours. The police logged it, filed it away. No one connected those shots to the missing couple, not yet. It wasn't until hours later that a police officer on patrol noticed something out of place. A green Dodge truck parked at a rest area along Route 5. Even from a distance, something looked wrong. As he got closer, he saw it. The driver's side window, shattered, glass glinting in the morning light. And beyond that, a scene that would haunt him for the rest of his career. Over the guardrail, they found them. Teresa and Mark, their dreams, their future, everything, ended in a violence that shocked even seasoned officers. They'd been dragged from the truck, multiple gunshot wounds telling a story of terror in their final moments. Inside the vehicle, signs of a desperate struggle. Blood staining the seats, the dashboard. Shell casings scattered like cruel breadcrumbs, leading to an unthinkable truth. The discovery set West Springfield police into motion. The rest area transformed into a crime scene. Yellow tape cutting off a piece of Route 5, while investigators began the meticulous work of piecing together a nightmare. Every detail mattered. Every blood spatter on the truck's interior told part of the story. Every shell casing in the gravel might hold the key. That green 1967 Dodge pickup, the truck Mark had lovingly maintained, the vehicle that had carried the young couple on countless adventures, now sat at the center of it all. The shattered driver's side window spoke of violence erupting in an instant. Bloodstains marked the seats where Teresa and Mark had sat, telling investigators that the attack began while they were still inside. Drag marks in the dirt traced a grim path to the guardrail, showing how the killer had tried to hide his work from passing vehicles. Inside the truck, investigators found a collection of seemingly ordinary items that might hold extraordinary importance. Cigarette butts, food wrappers, each one carefully bagged and tagged. But it was 1978. DNA testing was still the stuff of science fiction, and these potential clues could only tell them so much. Yet among these pieces of evidence, one would prove to be worth its weight in gold. A latent fingerprint, smeared in what appeared to be blood, on the truck's passenger side vent window. Incomplete, but present, waiting. Detective teams fanned out, knocking on doors, asking questions. The resident who reported gunshots at 4:00 a.m. couldn't tell them much more, just the sharp crack of shots breaking the pre-dawn silence. Truck drivers who regularly used the rest area were interviewed, but none remembered seeing the green Dodge or its occupants during those crucial early morning hours. The isolation that made the rest area popular with tired travelers had also made it perfect for something far more sinister. The location itself raised questions. Was this random, or had someone been waiting? Had Teresa and Mark been followed, or had fate led them into the path of a predator? The remote spot suggested either careful planning or terrible coincidence. Neither option brought comfort to investigators. They explored every angle. Robbery seemed an obvious motive at first, but nothing appeared to be missing from the victims or the vehicle. They dug into Teresa and Mark's lives, looking for enemies, for conflicts, for anything that might explain such violence. But everyone they talked to painted the same picture. Two young people who had nothing but friends, nothing but plans, nothing but hope for the future. That fingerprint, though, that became their focus. In 1978, fingerprint analysis was a painstaking manual process. No computers, no algorithms, just trained analysts examining ridge patterns and points of identification, one print at a time. They compared it against roughly 70,000 known prints in their files. Hour after hour, day after day, looking for a match that didn't come. The evidence they couldn't process properly haunted them. Those blood stains, those cigarette butts. In today's world, they might have told the whole story. But in 1978, they could only hint at what might have been. As weeks turned into months, and months into years, the case of Teresa and Mark became more than just an unsolved murder. It became a wound in the community that refused to heal. Rumors spread through East Longmeadow and West Springfield like wildfire. Some whispered about serial killers, others about drifters passing through town. Law enforcement worked to quiet these theories, but in the absence of answers, fear found fertile ground. For the families, time didn't heal. It just taught them to carry the weight differently. Teresa's mother created a small sanctuary in her garden, a quiet space where she could sit and remember her daughter's laugh, her dreams, her unfinished stories. Those notebooks full of Teresa's writing became precious artifacts, each page a reminder of the voice that had been silenced. Mark's father couldn't bear to part with that green Dodge truck. It sat in their driveway, a memorial in metal and chrome. He maintained it just as Mark would have. each turn of the wrench a conversation with his son's memory. Some neighbors thought it strange, this dedication to a vehicle that had been the scene of such tragedy. But for a father who had taught his son to love machines, it was the only way he knew to keep that connection alive. Investigators never truly let the case go cold. They'd pull out the files periodically, hoping fresh eyes might see something everyone else had missed. That fingerprint, carefully preserved, waited in evidence. The technology to read its story existed somewhere in the future. They just had to keep it safe until then. Then came October 2024, nearly 46 years after Teresa and Mark's last ride together. A tip shattered the silence. Someone came forward with information about Timothy Jolie, a 71-year-old man living in the Florida sunshine. The details were specific, compelling enough to make investigators dig deeper. What they found sent shockwaves through the department. In 1978, Jolie had been living just a stone's throw from the crime scene in West Springfield. He had a record, nothing violent, but enough to put him on law enforcement's radar. Then came the crucial discovery. In 2000, Jolie had been fingerprinted for a taxi license application in Springfield. When they ran those prints against the bloody smear from Mark's truck window, technology did what human eyes couldn't do in 1978. It found a match. But there was more. Records showed Jolie had purchased a Colt handgun just 1 month before the murders. While the murder weapon had never been found, this detail added another piece to a puzzle decades in the making. On October 30th, 2024, Florida Sunshine gave way to justice as law enforcement arrested Timothy Jolie at his Clearwater home. 2 counts of first-degree murder, charges that had waited 46 years to be filed. The news rippled through 2 communities, one in Florida, shocked to learn their neighbor's alleged past, and one in Massachusetts, where old wounds suddenly felt fresh again. Jolie's arrest wasn't the end of the story. In many ways, it was just the beginning of a new chapter. Within days, on November 5th, 2024, he appeared before a circuit judge in Pinellas County. The man who had allegedly evaded justice for nearly half a century made a decision that surprised many. He waived his right to contest extradition. The path was clear for his return to Massachusetts, where 2 counts of murder waited. As of November 16, 2024, Jolie sits in custody, awaiting his transfer back to the state where it all began. In the coming weeks, he'll face a Massachusetts court, where prosecutors will present evidence that bridges a 46-year gap, that fingerprint, his gun purchase history, and details that have emerged since his arrest. The legal machinery is turning, slower than some might wish, but turning nonetheless. For the families of Teresa and Mark, these developments bring a storm of emotions. Relief mingles with renewed grief as memories surface again. The prospect of justice, even decades later, offers a kind of closure, but it's a bittersweet victory. No verdict can bring back a daughter's laugh or a son's quiet smile. But beyond the emotional impact, this case has become a testament to forensic science and investigative persistence. That single fingerprint, preserved by investigators who refused to give up, waited patiently for technology to catch up to its story. It's a reminder to every detective working a cold case. Evidence that seems to tell us nothing today might speak volumes tomorrow. The community itself stands at a crossroads of healing. The rest area on Route 5 may never shake its haunted history, but now its story has a new ending. The case that taught a generation of local teenagers to fear the night now teaches a different lesson, about justice's long memory, about the power of persistence, about the importance of never giving up. Teresa Marcoux and Mark Harnish never got to live their dreams. She never published those stories, filling her notebooks. He never opened that repair shop he'd planned. But their story didn't end in that rest area in 1978. It lived on in the determination of investigators who wouldn't let their case gather dust. It lived in the memories of those who loved them. And now, it lives in the halls of justice, where after 46 years, the truth is finally coming to light. But this brings us to some difficult questions. What does justice mean after nearly half a century? Can a verdict, no matter how just, heal wounds this old? For the families who kept their loved ones' memories alive, is this enough? And what about the thousands of other cold cases out there? How many more fingerprints are waiting to tell their stories? How many families are still waiting for their own breakthrough? If Teresa and Mark's story has moved you, and I know it has, take a moment to share it. Every share could help another family searching for answers. Hit that subscribe button and tap the bell icon to join us as we continue exploring cases where justice refuses to let time stand in its way. Leave your thoughts in the comments below. What do you think about justice served after 46 years? Should we ever stop looking for answers in cold cases? Your insights help build a community dedicated to keeping these stories alive. And before you go, check out the other videos appearing on your screen now. Each one tells another story of justice delayed but not denied, of mysteries unraveled, of truth finally coming to light. Thank you for joining us in remembering Teresa Marcoux and Mark Harnish, two young people whose dreams were cut short, but whose story reminds us that it's never too late for the truth to emerge. Until next time, keep searching for answers, keep asking questions, and never lose hope that justice will find its way home.